start this meeting, so I'll call to order. And we'll start off with roll call. So for roll call, I will call the board members' names in alphabetical order. If you have a camera, please turn it on briefly when I call your name. If not, you can just answer. Jose Barajas. Jeff Hornbuckle.
Here.
Nick Kuntz.
Here.
James Langhorne.
Here.
John Maloney.
Here.
Jim Marston.
Here.
And Paul Spieler is here. So we're just missing Jose Barajas. But we have 5, so we'll start the meeting.
Mr. Chair, Jose Barajas recused himself from this hearing. He'll join us at the next hearing.
All right, thank you, Chief Building Official. We will now open for public comment. Anybody wishing to speak about items not on this agenda may do so. Please note, due to time constraints, each person may be limited to 2 meetings.
And we do have a member of the public who's joined, but I do not see a raised hand indicating that they'd like to speak. So I think that we don't have any public speakers at this point. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Greta. We will now close public comment and move on to the first subject item. First subject item is approval of the minutes for the Building and Fire Code Board of Appeals meeting on August 6, 2020. Are there any comments from the board? Please unmute yourself and use a camera if you have one. If you don't have a camera, please announce your name before speaking. Are there any comments from the board? Okay, we will need a motion to approve from the board to approve the minutes. Okay, my name is Paul Spieler. I'll make a motion to approve the minutes. Do we have a second on the motion?
John Maloney, I'll second it.
Thank you, John. Now we will call on a vote on the August 6th meeting minutes. We'll use roll call for the vote. All in favor say aye. All opposed say nay. Jose Barajas is not present. Jeff Hornbuckle.
Aye.
Nick Kuntz.
Aye.
James Langhorne.
Aye.
John Maloney.
Aye.
Jim Marston.
Aye.
Paul Spieler, aye. The motion carries. Next item, are there any announcements from the board or staff? Please remember to turn on your camera if you need to speak or state your name if you aren't using a camera. Are there any announcements? Okay, we have no announcements from the board or staff. Okay, we have our first subject item now. 7 West Figueroa is ratification of a hardship. The description is elevator and chair lift exemption. And the chair recognizes the staff member Elizabeth Sorban for the presentation.
All right, I am on. All right. Thank you, board members. This is my first Zoom meeting, so generally I would have my reports with little stickies and notes, and so I could get to them quickly. So will do my best to try to walk you through the project. So I listened to the minutes or to the meeting that we have online just to get an idea of what the board questions were previously. And it seemed like the biggest concern was the fact that under this revision to a project or additional work that was done, that the concern was that the applicant hadn't spent the 20% required, the minimum required. And so I just wanted to walk the board members through some of what has taken place on this project. And I'm hoping that you've had an opportunity to take a look at the notes. It's a pretty large report, but a lot of it are documents that you've already seen previously, and then we've adjusted some of the, oops, got timed out from my computer at work. So I've adjusted some of the numbers based on a couple of revisions that we discovered during the process. So I think when you take a look at the cost of construction, both for the elevator and for the chairlift, and then take a look at what they've spent, I'm going to walk you through and have the architects team also talk about what they've done in terms of equal facilitation and what additional work that they've started and commenced and haven't completed yet, but we'll discuss that a little later as they make their presentation. So one of the things that struck me about this project, and it's a little unique in what we've seen or reviewed previously and brought forth to the board, is the fact that this project was approved back in 2015 under a permit where they did a substantial alteration to the second and third floor. They have approval, and they did receive, I guess, a previous approval from the board relative to the chairlift and to, I believe, the chairlift and the elevator for certain. So, I mean, the applicant could choose, I don't believe that they want to, but they could choose to go back to their originally approved floor plan. So I don't think that we've really gained much by not allowing them to change some of the configurations in this one section of their structure. So on the second floor, they have 7 suites that are not accessible because they have stairs that lead you down to the lower level. I looked at both the second and the third floors and did a calculation. I don't know if it's 82 or 85% of the suites are accessible. And the architects team will speak about what they've done to mitigate these 7 suites that at the moment don't have any kind of access. These are unique, and this is not a regular office space. Individuals get to rent some of these spaces. I think the norm is maybe more than a week. So there's a lot of flexibility in terms of providing an equivalent facilitation of program to gain access to the majority of the structure. All restrooms, the conference room, audio room, are all accessible. That's not an issue. It's just these 7 suites that are on this section of the second floor that are not that are arrived through by the stairs. Sorry about that. So let's see. Currently, if we look on, I guess, the access compliance form that's on the screen now, if we can go to the second page of this form. Keep going. No. All right, go down to the bottom. I'm trying to see the cost of the chairlift as what they've denoted in terms of, I've got some notes here. They've shown that it cost us $72,000 for the chairlift, and they've already spent $49,000 on accessible features. And on the original application, what they've spent constitutes 10.6% of the total cost of construction. To include the chairlift would increase their cost to $121,295, which would bring them up to 26% of what the cost is. So that would bring them, in comparison to ADA, it says the minimum of 20%. So they would have exceeded that. In California, California's codes say that at some point you make everything accessible unless there's some circumstance that prevents something, which is, I'll let the architectural team speak to you about that. Let's see. Does anyone have any questions about the cost? Because I think this is what it boils down to, is the expenses that are going to be, that are supposed to be the obligation that hasn't been met.
Hi, Elizabeth. It's Nick Kuntz.
Ken?
No, I came to the same calculations you did, but what we're really talking about here, I mean, there's a large line item for the elevator, but my understanding is that has already been addressed under the historic alternative. And so that's, I'm not even sure that's appropriate to be discussed today. It's already a done deal, correct?
So when you look at alterations that are done within a 3-year period, you end up adding all of the costs of the current project and then the past 3 years worth of permits.
Yeah,
So because of that, we went back to take a look at what were the costs associated with the original exemption, and we just put them together as we do the construction costs for all projects.
Okay.
You know, it just seemed fair to put all of them together. Now, yes, you gave them an exemption, and they're not asking for that. That isn't the crux of this particular request. It's the chairlift that the board wanted them to
Right.
install. And so for this particular tenant, they don't own the building. They haven't been able to negotiate the property owner to install this. I asked them perhaps to take a look at their structural engineering report to see if there's any way that they could make something work. And they may have a sketch to show you what areas may be left. Their engineer did a pretty good report of outlining, and there's photographs in his report that show some of the concrete beams that come into that wall that is where you would likely put a chairlift. So it doesn't appear that.
That
Go
was
ahead.
my recollection from the last appeals board meeting on this, was that we asked the applicant, we said if they were willing to put in the chairlift, they could move ahead with their project. But if they wanted to pursue an exemption on that, they needed to bring back more than the CASP's opinion that it was technically infeasible. I wanted to see an engineer's professional opinion and what the physical barrier was that was creating the technical infeasibility. And it sounds to me like the only barrier is cost. And if we're talking about 6.5% over the minimum, the floor of 20%, I don't see a hardship here.
So it's not just the costs. If you looked at the engineer's not calculations, but his plans, if someone can take us to, I think it is, let's see, page 33 of the PDF. All right, go to the next page. There's some photographs in this report. There we go. Okay, so there's the wall that would have to be removed in order for any of this to be able to work. So if you go to the next photograph. So you can see that there's a concrete beam that is being supported in that wall. And then there's on the original plans, that thickened wall appears to be a URM wall. There may be a portion of it may not be URM. We wouldn't know until if they'd have to open up that wall. But according to the engineer, keep going to the next photograph. He believes there's structural elements that exist in this. Oops, that's the next one. That's for the lower level and what's being supported. Okay. So we don't know for certain how much of that wall could be removed. And in the presentation by the architectural team, they're going to have a floor plan that shows if there's any leftover space in terms of the chairlift and that stair width being still available.
I see in this last exhibit 4 here, that looks like a stair lift that doesn't preclude the use of stairs. It folds up when it's not in use, and the stairs would still remain usable.
So this, I just want to point out, this is not compliant.
This is not compliant. no
Correct.
such, no lift of this type is compliant?
Go down to the next page. There's another photograph. Oh, keep going. Right there. That was the chairlift that they were proposing to use. That is compliant.
But is it,
And it doesn't, I don't know what that side portion is, but in some of the other installations that we've seen, it takes up space to be able to get the equipment and the chairlift in
Yeah.
there.
no, I understand. But the previous type of lift, that specific model might not have been compliant. But is it you or the applicant's position that there is no compliant lift of that style?
If you go back 2 photographs, Greta or Maria, I'm not sure who's doing this. Okay, that one. So this size needs to have rails around it, and so it gets to be a little beefier than what is in this photo. But you'd have to have 44 inches of stairs left in order for it to be code compliant. So I believe that the architect's also going to have a sketch of what that looks like with a unit that might comply.
Okay. Thank
And again, that's the assumption that you can take something out. Based on the photographs from the structural engineer, that entire wall's not available, and there's the belief that it's most of it's URM, which we won't remove. They can't remove.
Elizabeth, do you think, and Nick, do you think it might be helpful if we let the
Yeah.
applicant's team give their presentation and then we can field questions? They might answer some of the questions before we even get to the Q&A. Are you done, Elizabeth, or was there more you wanted to present?
If there's any questions by the board, I think we've beat this one up enough. They've heard it, they've seen it, they are familiar with some of the issues. And I think it's mostly costs, but I think the team has done a pretty good job of addressing what the needs are. And so I'll let their team address all of the concerns.
Elizabeth, this is Jim Marston. I have a question. I know that ADA does require that over time, the building owner brings any building up to full compliance. You just said that the owner here does not want to spend any money on this. The applicant is not going to spend money. So when in the future do you even imagine that this will be fully compliant if we follow the ADA code and the owner doesn't want to spend any money?
Well, the ADA code in historical buildings gives some more flexibility to the property owner and the tenants. And California is more restrictive. And, so I don't know at what point, what kind of work would have to be done in order for them to be able to achieve that goal. So I don't know how to answer that question.
Well, okay, my concern, I'll just state it again. If the owner doesn't want to spend any money in the future and the tenant's not going to, then I think this will never get fixed. 100 years from now, it's still not going to be fixed. And that's bothersome because the ADA says you should spend money over time to bring everything up to full compliance. And I don't see how that's ever going to happen. So that was my question. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think that ends our presentation from Elizabeth. So the board would now like to recognize Chana Morris of Nelson Worldwide to present their request for ratification of the hardship. So Chana, you may proceed.
Hello, everyone. It's Hannah Morris. Can you all hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
You're fine.
Okay, great. So I am here to discuss further our client's request for relief from hardship. As the board member, Mr. Kuhn, recognized, the elevator portion has already been granted, and we're here just to discuss the chairlift. Before we get into the details of the chairlift, I did want to go through the equivalent facilitation. Sorry, I'm trying to share my screen. there we go, that my client is providing in terms of equivalent facilitation in their space, the program that they have in place and that they've trained their employees on, and just to give the board a better understanding of what they've done so far in terms of that program, and then we'll discuss the construction work as well. Just so everyone's familiar, this is actually the Regis sales plan for the center. So this is the plan that they present to potential clients when they're trying to sublease the space. As Elizabeth had noted previously, the way that Regis conducts their business is this is not really a traditional office space. It's a space where they do co-working and they sublease the office spaces to clients. And those clients then in turn will sometimes have visitors, et cetera, meetings, as anyone would during normal business practices. So if you look at the third floor, which is where the main entry into the Regis Center is, that's where your reception desk is. This is all accessible. Aside from being able to manage their leases and provide anyone who needs an accessible office a lease for an accessible space, they've also gone ahead and removed 2 spaces from their inventory, so they are not putting those up as leasable spaces. There's one office on the 3rd floor, which is just rear or just to the rear of reception, number 317. And then if you go down to the 2nd floor, they've also included office 223 as a day office. So those spaces are always available to anyone who needs them in terms of accessibility or any other day use. They're not being subleased with their standard leasing practices. Additionally, there's a co-working space. There are 2 separate co-working spaces that are available, which are accessible. And the meeting room, the boardroom in the space is also accessible and readily available to clients as needed or visitors as needed. So, and apologies if I'm clicking through very quickly on this, let me know if you need me to slow down. But aside from that, they've also implemented a training program with their employees. The employees go through a basic ADA course, learning what ADA is and true compliance. They get a basic understanding of what equivalent facilitation is, and they're trained in assisting anybody who enters the center to gain access to the space that would be accessible for them. Does anybody have any questions regarding that? Apologies if I spoke too fast.
This is Jim Marston again. I've stopped by there several times in the last 2 or 3 years. When it has been open, I would talk to people who worked there and no one understood anything about the ADA requirements. So you keep saying they're trained, but I haven't heard that yet. The last time I went by, the place was closed, so I couldn't get in and see what had happened. But can you tell me how much of this is open now to the public and what kind of training they really have, or is there still nobody there yet working?
Well, so because of COVID, their operations hours have really been restricted in terms of being open to the public. So they are currently open, and each center is a little bit different, but they're currently open, I believe, between the hours of 11 a.m. and 1:30 p.m. or 2 p.m. That's when the offices or the office doors are open to the public. They do have a receptionist on site supporting their clientele during regular business hours, but in order to limit exposure to potential viruses like COVID, they have limited public access to the site. So to give you a time frame in terms of that training, the training was developed at the end of last year. Um, the center team, which is comprised of 2 individuals currently, Ari and Savannah. They've both gone through the training. I have discussed personally with them at length because they did have questions. So they both do understand what the requirements are. And there is a document, or actually a binder in place at the reception counter, which has the printouts of all the documents in terms of the training and review that they've done. And they are aware that those day offices are available for anyone that needs them. And they have gone through the training, and I've seen they have a sign sheet confirming that they've gone through the training. So that has been supplied to us as well to attest that they've gone through that training. Unfortunately, due to the current state of affairs, the center really hasn't been fully open. However, I can attest that they have been trained, and they do understand.
Thank you
the
for that.
overall.
One thing I'm just needed to understand, you mentioned I think it was 11 to 1:45 was open to the public. Does that mean that there's people working there all during the day? They just can't have visitors? Is that correct? Or does everybody have to go out except for about 11 to 1:45?
So that is really in terms of having the center open for deliveries, mail, things of that nature. Clients who do lease the spaces within, they have regular access to the center. It is key card access, so it's secured access.
Okay.
And so they're able to access the center and work as they need to. However, it's just not open to public access currently.
Okay, thank you. And that includes visitors to a certain client there? Is that called public access? Or can a client come in at 9 a.m. or something?
So in terms of someone who's subleasing the space, like if they have a client, you mean?
Yes.
So currently, they have an access log. So their clients will give Regis a list of visitors, and they will arrange with the receptionist who's there in-house to get their visitor into the center.
All right. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions about that? I thought I heard someone.
Any other questions from the board? Okay, Hannah, is there anything else you would like to add?
Yeah, so I just wanted to talk a little bit in terms of what we did in terms of due diligence for that chairlift. We did bid that out again. We went to 3 separate GCs. One GC did decline to bid just because of the nature of things at the moment. The GC that we included in the pricing package that Elizabeth shared with you all was the lowest bidder. And that was Casco, I believe. They did the original construction on the center. And the third GC who provided a price, their price actually came in at almost $150,000. I do have that if you all would like to see it, but I just did want to let you know that we did do our due diligence and made sure that we were getting the lowest cost. And in terms of, I'm going to pull up the report that Elizabeth put together. That does include the pricing from the GC, if I could get there. It's just so big.
Hannah, that's page 24 of the PDF.
Oh man, I was going the wrong way. Thank you. Thank you so much. I did want to point out, because there was some concern from the board previously that what we were specifying was an exorbitantly priced lift. We were able to find a lift that was under $10,000. However, the cost associated with installing that lift are really surrounding the structural elements and removing everything. And this, I would have to say, this price is really assuming that everything goes perfect and there's no issues behind the wall. If we go in and there are those structural beams, which the structural engineer noted, we may not be able to fully install the lift and or it would increase the cost substantially. So I did want to bring that to your attention. But in terms of market cost for the work proposed, making assumptions that it is the best case scenario, this is really, it is a fair cost. Additionally, I did want to share with you the floor plan, if I could get to it. Sorry, I have too many files open. Where did it go? Oh, apologies. I must have closed it by mistake, unless I have. There it is. Okay. This is prior to the last piece of construction. And I did want to bring this to your attention. This shows where we're proposing to put that stair lift. And it shows where we have that concrete beam above. Now showing in floor plan, and this is actually assuming that we would put a non-compliant lift because it is the smaller footprint. Even with a smaller footprint, we would be going into that wall where we have that concrete support beam. A larger lift, one that is fully compliant, would actually be nearly 5 feet. I believe it's 56 inches by 63 inches. So you would be looking at something right here. 63. Oh no. That's what I get for trying to be fancy. So it would be 56. Apologies. There we go, 63. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. But anyways, I apologize. Right here, you see that this is 4 feet by roughly 3'6". And taking that into account, you would be looking at something more around 5 feet by 5 feet. There we go. So it would really be going more into that support piece. With that being said, I do want to go back to the equivalent facilitation that my client has put into place. We did find that even though we had our inspections with the city, there were some items that we could go back and rework in terms of the restrooms. So we're in the process of obtaining a permit revision to do some additional work on the restrooms to make sure that the door swings are correct here. And then to make these restrooms newly compliant. They were compliant at the time that they were installed, but we're going back and making some additional adjustments to make them compliant to the new ADA code. So I do believe that my client in good faith is really doing everything that they can to bring everything up to par and to make sure that anyone who comes to the center can access any of the facilities that they would need, anything you would generally expect to access within an office space is accessible to them. And it is just that small portion of those offices that are not currently accessible. So with that, I'll open it up to any additional questions to the board. And again, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Hannah. This is Nick Kuntz.
Hi, Nick.
Hey, how are you? So, yeah, I'm a little confused.
So
about-
Nick, excuse me, let's open it to public comment, and then we'll come around and have the board question the staff or the applicant.
Sure.
Okay. So would the moderator please check the control panel for public speakers and then call on them in alphabetical order?
Sure. I do not see any raised hands. Again, if you're a member of the public who would like to speak, you can use the raise hand function to show that you would like to speak. I'll give it a second here. And I do not see any raised hands, so no public speakers at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We will now close the public speaking portion, and we will now close public comment, excuse me. Now, are there any questions from the board to the staff or the applicants? Please be sure to use your camera when speaking. Thank you.
Oh, now with audio. All right, we'll try this again. So I'm a little confused about the technical feasibility of this. It seems to me that what is required, and as you have suggested or indicated, Hannah, the best case scenario from your perspective is 6.5% over the minimum. And I'll remind you that your client could be held by California Building Code to over $1 million of required threshold improvements. Well, I guess we've already agreed that the $800,000 elevator is accommodated under historical code, but there's still a lot more expenditure that could be required without a hardship. I think that there's few, if any, members of this board besides me who would disagree that 289% is a hardship. But 6.5% does not seem like a hardship to me, but I have heard some doubt from you about being able to do it for that cost. And so that's what I was looking for in the last meeting is some sort of verification from an engineer about the technical feasibility. And I don't feel like you've answered that question. We had some doubts about what was behind that column. There might have been structure there. We asked that you try to determine that and come back if you wanted to pursue a hardship. And I don't feel like I've heard an answer to that.
Can you all hear me? Yes. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, I can understand where there's some confusion. We did have a structural engineer go out and take a look, as is shown in Elizabeth's report. From their examination, they do believe that there is structural elements in there that cannot be removed. Unfortunately, without peeling everything back and examining, you can't be sure 100%. But I would say as much as you can be sure, looking at the structural elements from the interior of the space, that it would be an issue. The struggle here is that it is a historic building, and there are elements that are always unknowns when you go into a building and take things apart.
Anna, I'd just like to ask if you could look at page 33 of the PDF of the staff report. It's the studio engineer's August 13th letter. And I'd like your professional opinion on that letter. Does that letter inform us that it's structurally feasible to put the chairlift in, or or does it state to the contrary?
Could we scroll down to the bottom of the letter? Okay, thank you.
Okay. Just rereading it for myself. Yes, I would say that this letter says it is feasible, however, not achievable in an economic sense.
Yeah, I mean, he says that significant structural design work from the third floor down to the lower levels would be required. So that, you know, that says, that's a pretty strong statement right there.
It's a very strong statement.
And my firm did a lot of seismic upgrades to these unreinforced brick buildings back in the 90s. And looking at the floor plan, you know, there would be no architectural reason for that wall to jut out into the stair area where the chairlift is proposed. That would definitely be part of a URM wall. Otherwise, they would have taken that back to open that up more. So, you know, I see this as being, you know, I agree with what the engineer is saying here on this. And by the way, my name is Paul Spiel, Chair.
Thank you,
Chair
Paul.
Spieler, can you hazard a guess to quantify the expense we're talking about?
Well, basically these unreinforced masonry buildings do not meet current code. So the state adopted a unreinforced masonry building code. And so what they say is I think you may remove 20% of the wall in that direction, but then you have to do testing and analysis and all that. So basically these brick walls are all acting as shear walls. Even though they're unreinforced, they have some capacity, and that's all based on testing the mortar strength, testing the brick strength. So when you remove a portion of that, you're weakening the building there. And so you are typically required to either put in a steel moment frame or another concrete, new concrete columns and beam shear walls. So, you know, it's going to be very expensive. I couldn't venture to guess, but I would say, you know, $100,000 is not, I wouldn't be surprised if it's well over $100,000.
Great, thank you.
I want to add something to the conversation. Because the structural engineer wasn't 100% certain, and the belief is that a portion of that wall that protrudes into the stairs is it's likely URM, whether it's all of it or most of it, we're not certain. So I think when Hannah and I were discussing it, I understood that she had different bids, and because we weren't sure what was there, we just decided to take the cost that was the least, because generally that's what one would do is to choose the contractor. So the spread was pretty high. So if you were to take the contractor's price of 150, clearly that's a bigger chunk of what would be required. And I'm not sure what the math is. I haven't added up the numbers, but again, we took the position as, is there the possibility and what would have to happen? And that's why she ended up doing these floor plans to demonstrate, is there any stairway left and can you even get it in there? And so thank you, Hannah, for doing that, because I think that demonstrates pretty clearly that there's not a whole lot of space. And what we can get in there is the one that's a non-compliant chairlift. All right, thank you.
Are there any other comments from the board to the staff or the applicant?
I guess I do have one more comment. I just want to speak briefly to the idea of equivalent facilitation. And until you've been in a chair, you don't really realize that term is a fallacy. It's not equivalent to have to ask somebody for help. That's not the same as being able to do it yourself. So that's not, there is no such thing as equivalent facilitation, even though it's defined in the code.
This is the chair, Paul Spieler. So one thing, that impressed me with this project is that, it's, as Hannah said, it is kind of unique in that the offices are leasable, and 83% of these, the total, are accessible for use by the disabled. So it seems to me, all I know about the term equivalent facilitation is what I hear here, and it's basically, to me, that means if you can't meet the one of the requirements, then you try to do something in other areas that helps. And it seems to me like this applicant has done a lot of what we would call equivalent facilitation to make them more accessible. So I think that, here with the 83% offices, it's very easy for them to accommodate the disabled. The chair seems like there's just inherent problems with requirements for stair width, and there's structural items involved. So I just don't see this to be a reasonable request. I think it's going to be costly, and I think you're going to be giving up things, or, I just don't see that. I think with the 83% of space already available for disabled, I think that it's very easy that can be accommodated.
It's easy to see that now, and it's very easy for me to see, based on my previous experience in other places, how these policies are completely lost once they get through this stage. They design the policy, and it's important to get the approval, but once there's an approval, these policies are forgotten. That handbook will be lost. The training will not occur in future years, and there's nothing this board or city staff can do to ensure that will happen down the line. And there's nothing, frankly, that the applicant can do to ensure that policy will remain. There's no motivation for it, and there's no legal repercussions for not doing it. So that's my basis for advocating strongly to deny this ratification of hardship.
Well, Nick, let me ask you a question. So if somebody is disabled, or some person goes in and sees that the signs are down, or they're not compliant, can there be a complaint made? I mean, I think
sure.
it should be reported, correct?
Yeah, that process is civil litigation.
Okay.
And that's expensive and purposely so onerous that very few people follow up with it.
Mr.
Okay,
Chair.
so this is Paul Steve. Yes.
Yeah, I hear Nick's concerns. I'm glad that we pointed out that the Americans with Disabilities Act has an enforcement mechanism, and we've acknowledged it. It is litigation. That is explicit. That is what the federal government intended explicitly when they set up the ADA. So we may not like that. We may think that's not as functional as, or rapid, quick, convenient, effective, maybe even, as we'd like, but that is the federal regulation. that is the standard. So thank you for recognizing that.
All right.
This
So
is
are there
Jim
any?
Marsh.
Okay,
I
Jim,
would
go
like-
ahead.
All right, hold on. I would like to just make a comment about, I think that Hannah and I have had a lot of conversations. And I don't think that I was easy on Hannah. I really grilled her about what they were proposing. I did as much research as I could. I think I put her on the hot seat sometimes just to say, this is, this is an issue for board members, for the public, because we are trying to make this as accessible as possible without creating such a hardship on the tenant. So I don't think that I made it an easy pass for her. And again, in terms of the pricing, I asked for her to keep the lower price because we weren't sure what was there. It's likely that there's going to be structural issues there. And she really went back to Regis to figure out what do they normally do in other locations. And the reality is if we have, because they're spaces that are individually being leased, if there's a disabled patron that wants to lease a space, they have 86% of the office spaces are available to them. They wouldn't be placed in those 7 stations. But if for the chance that there might be someone that needs to visit someone on that floor, then those 7 spaces have access to these 2 spaces that won't be leased out. And that, or they have the conference room or the AV room. I think there's some other multiple spaces that are available for someone to use. So we really beat this one up, and I think I beat her up a little bit in terms of just asking her lots of questions and making sure she went back to her team to get as much as they can. And I mean, they've done a lot of work between the elevator and the chairlift, and going back, they sent a team back in there to verify dimensions in the bathrooms to check. And so that's why they're coming back for a revision. They realized that there were some spaces that they could fix. And so I think that they've really pursued as much of this as possible. So I just want to thank Hannah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, this is Jim again. I have a couple comments and questions. I want to just quickly say I understood what Nick was saying about there's no way to enforce this in the future. As we all know, if the market picks up and all of a sudden there's a big demand for your spaces, it's going to be very hard for a business owner to say, oh, we're going to leave those 2 empty with no revenue from now on until eternity, or will they take a new tenant and use up some of those spaces that we say are going to be saved? We see this way too many times. So that's the problem that we have here is you can say we're going to keep it open, and then later on, there's no way to enforce that. So that's always a problem. I'm not going to say you're going to do it, but that's a problem that we can't deal with as long as the owner or the tenant says we're going to keep this open. We have to believe that, but we know that doesn't always happen. So that's just my backup on what Nick said. So I have a few quick questions. One is,
Yes.
I noticed from the photographs that the 2 bathroom doors were not installed as your plans showed. You
Yes,
said
the
you're going to
workers-
fix that. Do you know what
Yes,
happened there? Was that the workers or was that the contractor or?
So that
was it
was
doing?
actually thank you to COVID. We actually had an infection, an exposure issue with the contractors on site. And so we had to stop all work. And when we go back to do the restroom work, we're going to fix those doors. So the permit is still open and we're just going to put in an addendum for the restroom work and take care of the doors at that time. And apologies for that. There was an issue and we've still not been able to have contractors engaged because we keep having continual exposure issues. But we're trying to do everything as safely as possible, and it will be taken care of as a part of that additional addendum to the permit.
I'm not looking for the name of the person who did it, but can you just tell me how it was installed incorrectly according to the plans?
So the original build out, the doors were installed that way and approved on the original build out. And then as a part of this permit, this revision We were going to fix that. It was included in our drawings to be completed, but the work is not done yet. There's still pending items, and we're
Okay.
putting in another addendum for the additional restroom work.
So you're
on the
saying
other
somehow when it was originally put in, it was according to plans because it didn't have the clearance. that
Those
you
were
needed.
those were existing. So when our client took over the space, that is the way that the landlord had turned it over to us, and
Oh.
we did get approval at the time
Okay.
for the original permit. So with this new permit, we were going to rectify the situation.
All right. So that was something that was missed probably when it was first done by
Way
the
back
former
in
tenant
2000 something,
and,
yeah.
and also by when you took it over, no one seemed to have caught this. That makes sense now.
Unfortunately, yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Now, the other thing that I want to bring up is I saw all your pictures of your signage.
Yes. So
Okay.
I know what you're going to say. It's the oh my lord.
Non-reflective. There should be non-reflective and high contrast lettering, and both of those are missing here. Correct?
The ISIS
Well,
symbol.
That's yes, the ISIS symbol. I'm sorry. The ISIS symbol is on site. It's sitting on the reception desk. They've sent me a picture. They've received them, but we just haven't had anybody on site. We haven't been able to get anybody on site to do the install and the additional work. So that'll be taken care of. So in terms of that signage, I think it may be where it's located because there's a window right across from it, but this signage is ADA compliant. And it comes from our signage vendor as being ADA compliant. If you feel it's too reflective, I can talk to Regis and have them adjust it. It's a very easy fix.
Okay.
But
Because
it is ADA compliant.
all the pictures I saw seem to be highly reflective, which is hard to read. And I don't know whether there really are high contrast, but I'll let you go with that. Like this one here is black on gray. Is that really fully contrasted? I don't think so myself, but Ms. Sorgman, what do you think? Is this picture here actually contrasting?
Mr. Chair, Board Member Marston, Building and Safety will inspect all the signage at the final inspection of this project to make sure it's compliant with California Building Code.
Thank you. And you did mention the ISA signage. I asked last time for an ISA to be put on the outside door because there's too many things to read, especially with COVID around. There's all these signs to read.
Understood.
So
Yes.
if that sign is there, it would say, hey, if you're in a wheelchair, please look at this sign. So if you can
Yes.
do that, that would be great. Okay.
Yep, and we have procured the signage. It is, like I said, we have a box of signage sitting at the reception
Okay.
desk just waiting
Thank
to be
you.
installed. So,
Now, the other one- Go ahead.
no, go ahead.
ahead. The other thing is not to make a complaint here, it's just to point something out to the board that I think we need to be really aware of. Originally, this wheelchair lift, not the stair lift, but the regular lift, was deemed technically infeasible without much support from the engineer. It was just assumed it was technically infeasible. Then, of course, the contractors go through and they put in paint and molding and new carpeting and they fix up everything. Now, when you're being asked to consider putting in a wheelchair lift, your charge is under $10,000 for the lift, but we have costs to repaint stuff, to redo the molding, to redo the carpeting. There's, I think, $15,000 for inspection or supervision, I should say. So most of the cost of this $10,000 lift is refixing what had already been modified. If we'd have caught this at the beginning and you hadn't asked for the technically infeasible, it wouldn't have cost nearly as much. I'm not going to go back and say we got to do this or that, but I just want to warn everybody here, if we let something go through as infeasible and then we say, no, it's not really, we made a mistake, but it's going to cost too much to the cosmetic changes. And like I said, $15,000 for supervision seemed like a lot of work. But I want to make sure that the board understands that if this had been done correctly and the technically infeasible hadn't been given, it would be much less money to put in the lift now. So I thank you. I think that's all I wanted to say.
I did want to address your first point where you were concerned in regards to those offices reverting back to be leased out. And I just want to speak, sorry, on behalf of Regis and IWG in regards to that. They've actually implemented a day office program throughout the country. It's now a part of their standard operations for all of their centers. And I do have a letter that came from the area vice president. He was not able to attend today because he had a conflict in terms of a meeting with his leadership. But he did send over a letter certifying that they would maintain the program in place and they would do yearly training along with training that's incorporated into onboarding with any of the center team. But I do want to commend my client in terms of they've taken that day office concept and they've actually pulled it into all of their centers. So it's a standard operating practice now, and any Regis that you go to will have at least one day office available that's always readily available. The goal for all of their centers is to make them, if they're not accessible, is to make them as accessible as possible. So that is just something that they've done above and beyond starting here and being rolled out throughout the country.
Thank you. That's good to know. But we still don't know what's going to happen when some other company decides to take these over from Regis. So there's still no guarantee, but I know we can't get into that. But there's no way to guarantee that those things are going to be there forever. But thank you for all your work. I appreciate it.
One more comment I have to share with the board for a little perspective. I'm looking at on the low end to do this if all things go well. It's 6.5% above the 20% minimum. That's the floor. There is no ceiling. California Building Code allows for unlimited spending for 100% compliance. On the high end, you mentioned you had a range where one contractor bid almost twice as much, or more than twice as much, perhaps 150,000. And by my calculations, that would still only be 40% of the total cost. And 20% is the minimum, and there is no maximum requirement. So I still think I don't see a hardship here. That's just my opinion.
Are there any comments from the other board members to the staff or applicant? This is Paul Spieler. I just want to go back to say that I think that I agree with Hannah and Elizabeth that this applicant and tenant has done a lot of effort to making their building accessible. And I think it's reasonable that, 83% of the offices are accessible. And I think it's reasonable to assume that the staff there can make those rooms available for disabled access. So I don't like to see money spent that is not needed, not really reasonable or needed. I think, we also have to look at our downtown area, that we're trying to make this area friendly for businesses. There's a lot of vacancies downtown. And I think this is a reasonable request. I don't see this, I think they've done a good job with other areas of the building. And I know it doesn't meet the 20% rule, but, I just think that I just get the feeling that this tenant has done a good job trying to make their space accessible. So that is my comment. Do we have any other comments from any other board members?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Jim Langhorn.
Yes, Jim.
I've listened to everybody, and I'm very appreciative for all of the efforts and energies that staff, that the representatives, and also members of our board have expressed. It's clear that there's a lot of effort that's gone into try to create some clarity here. Against that, one of the things that resonated most deeply for me was a comment that Nick made about what it's like to be in a chair and having to ask for help. The reason I'm saying this is because I'm in the midst, along with my wife, of trying to provide a future for 90-year-old parents who are very independent and are now resisting help. And I feel the struggle. It was very palpable for me when he made the comment. That aside, what I wanted to mention is that I looked at a concern I had from back in my days of doing plan review, where projects would come to me in piecemeal. I never ever got to see the pearl necklace. I only saw a bead at a time. And that didn't happen here. I was very grateful for the fact that Elizabeth captured that they're trying to account for the whole project. And that was the concern that I had coming into the meeting, and I'm grateful to see that issue was addressed. I guess in conclusion, I'd have to say that I do see the hardship here, but I also see the need for society to move forward on these issues, however hard it may be at times. That's my comment.
Okay, so do we have any other comments from board members? Now we will need to make findings and a motion from the board to affirm, deny, or amend the decision. Yes.
Can I ask? I'd appreciate what Mr. Langhorn said. I appreciate if we could just hear from the other board members, their feelings before we even talk about a motion, just to get an idea of what's out there. Could the other board members give us their comments? Okay.
Are there any other board members that would like to give us their comment?
This is John Maloney. I agree with what everyone has said, and especially that a lot of time and effort has been made to try and make this work.
This is Jeff Hornbuckle. I, am in complete agreement with the comments by the previous board members. This is a difficult situation, but I do believe that, this is a hardship. Doesn't take away the fact that it's, still an accessibility issue, but I do believe it is a hardship.
Okay, thank you. I think we've heard from everyone that's present. So I would like to now move on to a motion, and so let me get to that page here. So we need findings and a motion from the board to affirm, deny, or amend the decision of the chief building official with respect to the approval of the unreasonable hardship. So our statement of findings would be to ratify the decision of the building official to approve the unreasonable hardship.
What's the finding?
To approve the decision of the chief building official to grant the unreasonable hardship for the elevator exemption and the chairlift.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
That
Yeah.
sounds more like a motion. I think the findings would be something that would support that. So the things that I have written down in my notes here in support of that would be, there was a comment that 83% of the offices were accessible. There was a genuine effort by the applicant to comply, and there was a 3-year comprehensive approach to evaluating the 20% path of travel improvement requirement. Those were the three that I had jotted down as findings.
Before we go further down this road, does anybody agree that 6.5% is a hardship? Because what if that's really all it takes to achieve what I think is required here to meet the minimum 20%? Does anybody argue 6.5% is a hardship?
Board Member Kuntz, this is Jeff Hornbuckle. I just want to make sure I'm understanding what you're asking. The 6.5% of additional cost to meet the 20% minimum, is that what you're?
No, in order at the low end of their bid, in the best case scenario, 26.5% would provide the lift in a perfect scenario, and it would only be 6.5% over the 20% minimum required by the California Building Code. So if it were that simple, just an extra 6.5% instead of 40, 50, 80%, is 6.5% a hardship? Are you willing to sell out the disabled community for 6.5%? Have you ever had a project that wasn't 6.5% over budget?
Nick, I'd like to chime in. What we presented was in the best case scenario, and what I think all understand is that they're likely not going to be able to meet that because of what was presented in the engineering report, and the likelihood of what the size of the lift, what we could fit in there. So it's not going to be just 6%. And you calculated, if you did your math right, I think you said it was 42% is what it would increase, so that difference will jump up. So I don't think it's just 6%. I don't think that's
okay. So that's 20% over the minimum. Actually, I came up with 40% on the high end of their estimates. So is an additional 20% over the minimum state requirement a hardship?
But that would be 40% of the project, of the total project. And this portion was, their budget was 82,000. And the reality is they could go back to their originally approved floor plan, still use that space as an office, and we've not gained anything.
Okay, so we had a little silence period there. I would like to repeat the statement of findings then, and we can get a motion and then vote on it. Statement of findings are: one is that 83% of the office space is accessible. Two, the applicant has taken measures to make other portions of their building accessible. And three, that was done during a 3-year consideration of past construction. So we want to, do we have a motion to approve the unreasonable hardship?
It's John Maloney. I'll make that motion.
Okay, do we have a second? Okay, this is Paul Spieler. I'll second the motion. Is there any discussion by the board for this motion? Okay, I'd like to call to a vote. We will use roll call for the vote. Please use your cameras. All in favor say aye. All opposed say nay. Jeff Hornbuckle,
Aye.
Nick Kuntz,
Nay.
Mr.
James
Chair,
Langhorn.
Mr.
yes.
Chair, I need to stop us for just a moment. I need us to consider the composition of the voting members of the board. We need to
Okay.
have, we need to have a total of either 7 with 3 people representing the disabled community, or 5 and 2. I'm sorry, yeah, 5 and 2. Are we there?
I believe we have 6 board members present. And is James Langhorn a member of the disabled community, or is he not?
No, my hearing's not what it should be, but I was going to vote yay on this.
Yeah, so we need 1 member of the board who is not physically disabled to volunteer to step aside and let the other 3 members of the board that are not physically disabled represent the community.
I'll step
Okay,
aside.
Chief Building Official, this is Paul Spieler. I'll step aside.
Well, you seconded. And every non-disabled member has already made their position known prior to a vote.
So
Well, then it's time to vote. I mean,
we need,
And I feel that there's a problem here. And,
there is,
yeah,
we need to retake the vote after
but
some.
everybody has already expressed it doesn't matter. We've already been influenced. Everybody knows everyone's position. So
As everybody would if we would have had someone step down prior to the vote. That potential is always there.
Since I was not a maker or seconder of the motion, I'm happy to volunteer stepping down. This is Jeff Hornbuckle.
Thank you, Jeff. With that, Mr. Chair, you can take a new vote on the motion, and I would suggest you restate the motion before you take the vote.
okay, the motion is to approve the decision of the building official with respect to the approval of the unreasonable hardship. Statement of findings are 83% of the offices are already accessible. The applicant has complied for equivalent facilitation for disabled access throughout their building in other areas. And this is, and number 3, this has been over a 3-year consideration of past construction. The motion, do I have a motion? Let's go through the whole thing again. Do we have a motion?
This is John Maloney. I'll make the motion.
All right. Do we have a second on the motion? This is Paul Spieler. I'll second the motion. Is there any discussion by the board for this motion? Okay, I'd like to call the vote. We will use roll call for the vote. Please use your cameras. All in favor say aye. All opposed say nay. Jeff Hornbuckle is stepping out. Nick Kuntz.
nay.
James Langhorn.
Aye.
John Maloney.
Aye.
Jim Marston.
Nay.
Paul Spieler. Aye. Motion carries on a vote of 3-2. That brings us to our next subject item, the discussion and recommendations to discuss how the city should confirm the building permit applicant's adjusted construction cost. The description is validating the adjusted construction costs defined in the state building code, and Andrew Stuffler, the city building official, will present.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Greta or Maria, if you could put us on page 1 of the staff report, that'd be great. Hopefully you have had time to read the staff report that we prepared for you. I did do research. This was a topic that we discussed in the August meeting, I believe, on August 6th. And that was within the context of the scope and breadth and kind of depth of our accessibility plan reviews that we do. And we determined that, the board determined that they were going to endorse what was proposed, provided that I return to the board to further discuss how we consider, how we validate the permit applicants' adjusted construction cost of their project. Because, as we've seen in the prior item, that adjusted construction cost plays a key role in determining the extent of accessibility that's brought to an existing building when it's undergoing an alteration relative to its path of travel improvements. So I included for the board a definition of the adjusted construction cost because I thought it was really important for us to be able to see it and to understand that there are things that are not included in it and things that are. So in understanding this definition of what comprises what the adjusted construction cost is comprised of, we can look at these other RS means, different national models for estimating the value of construction, and we can see if they match. And what we'll find out is that in my research, nothing matches completely. Be wonderful if it did. Maybe that's a market niche. If anybody's listening out there, here's a market niche you might be able to champion, but right now there is nothing that we can find that matches it. So I looked, I did not include this in my staff report. I wanted to give it to you verbally, and I can share my screen with you if you'd like to show you some examples, but I can just testify that if you go to the City of LA's website, you will find that they have a way of determining the cost of the construction. If you go to the City of San Francisco, they have a way of determining the cost. They publish schedules. When I looked at these schedules that they had, it was interesting how they corresponded, City of LA's in particular, corresponded to the RS means, the ICBO model that we had proposed earlier, and that was included as Exhibit C in the staff report. And the board looked at that and endorsed that as well in the past. So I would love to come back to you and say, here's a model we found that is specifically configured to give us the state of California's adjusted construction cost estimate. And it considers all the factors in the definition of the adjusted construction cost, but it's not out there. So consequently, I've come back to the board to tell you nothing new. I wish I could. I think the direction that we've taken in the past policy that you and this board endorsed in Exhibit C is a very good, fairly simple way to validate construction cost and ask for additional information if we feel that construction cost is artificially low and isn't realistic. Is it perfect? Nope. Can people take advantage of it? Yes. So be it. I am open to listening to suggestions. If the board members or members of the public have found other methods that are more effective, I would like to see them. I'd like to look at them to be able to bring them to the board for our consideration and discussion, but I have not been able to find those. So it's kind of a disappointing staff report from my perspective. It's not the staff report I was looking forward to preparing for the board. I really wanted to bring to the board a more comprehensive look at how we could do this. I can't find that comprehensive approach. I can't define one without getting into excruciating levels of detail that we have no time in our office to be able to facilitate. And that's another important factor, right? We need to make sure we're adopting policies and procedures that we can afford to facilitate in the course of an ordinary timeframe for a plan review. So with that, I I offer my staff report to the board, and I do expect some disappointment. I want you to know I'm disappointed in the options that are provided, because there aren't any. It's a suggestion to continue to do what we've determined in the past was a good practice. But I am open, and I am very willing to listen to other alternatives that have been successfully deployed in the nation here, or the state. And with that, I'm available here to answer any questions.
John Maloney, I've got a question. I've noticed on a lot of projects that I've been involved in that through the course of construction, there's oftentimes a lot of changes. In some cases, the changes are pretty substantial. So the amount of money spent on the project from the time the project was submitted for permitting to the time that it was closed out, there's a pretty good difference there. Is there any reconciliation that's ever done at the end of a project?
Mr. Chair and Board Member Maloney, the only time we would require a documentation and an accounting for the increase in the cost of construction is if those changes in the field necessitated a revision to the project. So that would only happen if they were making changes that required a building permit, right? That would require another review of their code compliance. But if the changes that were made did not affect any elements that required a building permit, and that could be quality of materials that they use, right? The cost could go up significantly without us ever being aware of it.
Well, this is Jim Marston. I guess I'll jump in. I have listened to the entire discussion from the last meeting, and in that meeting, we talked a lot about all the shenanigans and the cheating. As Andrew said, there's ways to get around this. We heard from one staff member that probably half of the estimates are baloney. This money is going to the developer owner and coming out of the wheels and civil rights of the disabled community. So every time someone cheats on this estimate of construction costs, it affects people. And as I keep trying to say, this is not called construction estimate. This is construction cost. Now, I ask all you people who work in the trades to tell me that, don't you know that every time an owner decides to build or not build something, he knows exactly what the contracts are. He's got contracts from every of the subcontractors, and he has an idea of what it's going to cost him, the owner. And yet somehow we allow other people, designer or whatever, to give an estimate, which is never backed up, and there's no penalty. I'm always shocked because I worked in civil engineering where we based our fees on the construction cost. It started first with the estimate. At the end, it was on the true cost. I don't see why the city cannot ask for, please give us the contracts. In my understanding, when the building permit is pulled, it's a lot of times pulled by the general contractor. He knows at that time what is the total amount of money that we plan to spend on this project. And why can't we ask him to sign a legal document that, yes, this is the price I'm pulling this permit on, and if it doesn't match the permit, we have a problem there. I would like to bring up something to you. Let me get the right page here.
Would you like me to respond to that?
Okay.
Board Member Marston. So we have had instances in the past where we've required the contractor to provide us with a copy of their quote or their invoices or the signed, document that they state this is the actual cost, and they do. And it's the same cost that they told us that we didn't think was realistic. I can think of two sites where that's happened. One, it was a floodplain management issue, not an accessibility issue, but it had a threshold, right? And they were trying to show that it was going to be under the threshold. So while it would be, I'd like 90, the problem isn't with the 90% of the people, right? It's always the 10% that that we are, kind of setting our regulations to address. And I'm not sure that 10% would mind signing something that was just as inaccurate as the master application with a value on it that they sign when they submit their application.
Well, thank you for that answer, but is it possible just to get the actual contract submitted to you so you see what the contract is and not what he says it is?
Yes,
Is that
but
possible?
how do we know it's the actual contract?
Okay.
This is
we
Jeff
got it.
Hornbuckle. Oh, I'm sorry, Andrew, go ahead.
No, that's all right. We trying to validate whether it's actual or a phony actual, right? Yeah, that's, we can't do
As
it.
I
We don't know
mentioned
what it means.
before, I know that DSA actually says at the end of the project, we want to see your total cost. But let me go through something I got here. I looked at some different permits that I pulled out of the files. The I have a cost of $164 a square foot. That was Lululemon on their 740 State Street. These are out-of-state companies who seem to follow the rules, as Andrew said. And the next one I have is the one called the Blue Mercury. That was $162 a square foot. But then we started looking at things like, okay, I have one on okay, Sun Gas Hut was $67 a square foot. I have 820 State Street, which is only 142 a square foot. Seems pretty fair. But then we have in the 1000 block of State Street, 144 a square foot. So again, fair. But then we have a 1200 block of State Street, $17 a square foot was what they reported as their estimate.
Well, what was the scope of work? I mean, it's hard to say what the value of square footage.
Well, that's true. I could.
If they're just painting and carpeting, then sure.
Yes, I don't have all that detail here. I'm just saying that the range is huge. 17. I have another for 17, one for $33 a square foot.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can't really look at those numbers, out of context. We need to look at them, based on the scope of work.
I wish someone could. I mean, I can't do that because I'm not an employee.
Just to go back to the discussion prior, as far as submitting accurate bids, I think part of the problem too is that, these forms are submitted with the permit application. So oftentimes there is no construction bid at that time. So that's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I'd like to interrupt because we are supposed to have public comment before the board has their discussion. So if you could hold your comments, I would like to now open for public comment, and due to time constraints, each person may be limited to 2 minutes. So Greta, do we have any comments from the public?
Chair Spieler, there are no members of the public who have raised their hands to speak at this point.
Okay, I'd like to close public comment. So, okay, thank you, board members. We may continue our discussion.
Okay, this is still Jim here. I have a question for Andrew or Elizabeth. Something I'm very confused on. Sometimes I see that people use the square footage of the project as the whole building square footage. Other ones just use parts of the building. Is it legal just to say, oh, I'm only going to fix something here on the edges, but I'm not going to fix anything in the middle and reduce the square footage of the building? Or should the square footage on your application be the entire building square footage? I'm confused on that, so please help me out.
Chair, Mr. Chair and Board Member Marston, that is one of the things our plans examiners struggle with, trying to understand from the applicant what is the scope of their application. And so they work that out as a plan check correction until the plans examiner at the city is very comfortable with understanding what truly is the scope of work that they're proposing, they're showing on their plans, and they have in their description of work. And we strive to make that all match. So if someone's doing a tenant improvement in a State Street shell building that's sitting there, and they're going to do alterations to that building, they're going to tell us the square footage that's going to be altered. There may be a large portion of it that's not altered at all. Maybe they're altering just the restrooms. Maybe they're altering the restrooms and the service counter. So they do not have to. They do not have to state that they're altering the entire floor area, because they're not. They're only altering certain square footages.
Thank you. So you're saying then that if we use ICC or ENR or whatever, that square footage cost is only on the areas that are being altered. Is that the statement correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, Andrew, I want to point out that I did say, I found a document from the North Santa Barbara County Commission, Commercial Real Estate, and they have some new updates that you might be interested in. That's online. But the thing I really liked was, and I would like you to look at this. You looked at LA and San Francisco. San Diego has a updated ICC-based chart that they update every year on January. And so it's higher than the ICC chart that we use, but it's updated by the ENR cost of construction in 20 city. But it doesn't have what I think is the big problem is, and excuse me if I'm wrong, that you have a 30% deduction or 70% deduction on remodeling. Some people tell me that it costs more to remodel than it does to build a new building from scratch. And I'd like to get the input from the other contractors here. If you think that 30% of a new construction is really good for a remodel. But I would like you, Mr. Stuffer, to look at the San Diego building valuation schedule. It doesn't have that 70% discount, and it seems to be every year it's updated, so the city would not have to do their updating at all. You just get a copy from them. So I would like you to come back with this next month. But Mr. Stuffer, could you look at the San Diego building valuation schedule and let us know next month? I thought it was pretty good.
I will look at that, and I will follow whatever motion the board makes and approves today.
Okay.
Can you speak to the discount on remodeling versus new construction?
Yes, I'd have to go back and look at our August 6th meeting where we talked about this last. I'm thinking that the tenant improvement 30% was part of an old ICBO practice. I can't, because I honestly don't recall off the top of my head why we ended up with 30% there. Yeah, I don't recall. When I looked at the LA cost sheets, their TI is actually closer to 50%. It's a little under, it's probably like 45 or something. So we could certainly look at the percentages if we think those aren't realistic. That's definitely something that we can, is viable, defensible, and we can afford to do. Yeah.
I would highly recommend that, because that's my problem. When you say you can do something for 30% of a cost to build new, that just seems not to be true at all. And I think we should either get rid of that and make it 100%, or at least a more viable number. So I think the contractor community could actually help a lot with that and say, compared to a new construction, what do you think the real adjusted factor is?
So Jim, this is Paul Spieler, so Chair. So let's look at the building we just looked at. They're doing a tenant improvement on the inside. That's definitely going to be way less than building that whole building from scratch. So I don't know if I understand. I think 30% sounds like a very high number for just doing TIs inside an existing building. It's already got the foundation, has the framing, the walls, the roof, most of the plumbing and electrical and utilities. So I guess, am I missing something?
I think I'm looking more like a single story building on State Street, where you go in there and you repurpose it. It becomes from a retail shop to a restaurant.
Yeah, but you're not changing any of the existing structure on the outside of the building, right?
Correct. These are just things I hear from people in construction, and I don't know. That's why I'm asking you guys to think about that. But I think we really have to look at the scope of the work and what kind of discount do they get for just a remodel job. It just seems like we've taken advantage of, and like I said, it hurts the disabled community and it lines the pockets of the builder by lowballing their estimates. And again, this is called construction costs. It never says construction estimates. So that whole thing is bad. And the ICC form says, do not use this for construction cost. It says it over and over again at the very beginning. And Mr. Stuffer, if I remember right, I think those 30 and 70% discounts were added by you because I can't find them in the tip. If I go to the website and look up ICC, I don't see those numbers there. So it was my impression that you had added that. And so I just wish that we could come back and have someone look at the San Diego, get some real input from the construction people in this city who says, here's what's fair to use for an adjustment to anyone's estimate, whether it's ICC or ENR or Marshall Swift.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me what we're using is what the current development community thinks is fair,
Why do you say that?
because it's to their advantage.
Well, but those are the developers. I'm talking about more like the contractors who aren't the developers or pocketing the money from the work or from the ownership. They're just doing the contract.
There's a symbiotic relationship.
Well, I understand, but I just hope we could get some input. By the way, Mr. Stuffer, I read on your project cost above valuation threshold that you have that you sent us to line 1A says adjusted cost of construction for the project based on Marshall and Swift cost estimate. That's what the form says. But then your regular rules say it should be based on the ICC. So that has to be changed or there's something wrong there. But your form does say based on Marshall and Swift.
But this policy does not say that it shall be based on the ICC valuation tables. This policy says that if someone submits something to us that's lower than these values, then we will ask them for one of the three above. It just sets the baseline. It does not try to, it in no way tries to establish the actual value of construction. It just sets the floor. When you go below that, we're gonna tell you, you need to come back with something more detailed. You've passed the reasonableness threshold for us.
I'm missing something. I hope I heard it right. You're saying if they're below the ICC threshold, they have to use one of the three estimate packages, or they just have to go with the ICC threshold?
No. Well, consequently, right? I mean, just by consequence, if we set the very lowest limit, the ICC threshold, and someone submits something at the ICC threshold, it doesn't trip the requirement for them to provide something more specific. That's a reality of setting a threshold.
Right.
And when it comes to tenant improvements, we will talk about this for several meetings before we get to the point of tenant improvements are so vastly different amongst themselves. Trying to come up with a percentage is going to be impossible. A retail space on State Street going to a restaurant has very different costs than a retail space on State Street going to office, or several retail spaces in one building on State Street going to a hotel.
Yes.
Right. So that trying to come up with a percentage that's going to accurately give us an accurate construction valuation from one of these tables is not possible. So all we can do is set a limit, what we think is the below reasonable limit, and then we ask for more detail if they go below that. If the board wants to make a recommendation that we ask for these three, RS means Marshall Swift or an ENR cost estimate for every project, I would anticipate that you're going to get a lot of pushback from the development community and the contractors, like Nick said, because they're going to say, you know, that may or may not reflect what we're actually doing, and that's a lot more work. But the board could make a recommendation like that.
The process.
This is Chair Spieler. I'd like to make a comment on a couple of items we've been talking about. So number one is when plans are submitted to the building department, the owner usually has a budget on that, but the plans typically don't get put out to bid until after the building permit is issued. There may be a contractor on board. He can pick up the plans, but then those plans go out for printing after the permit is received, and they go out and they proceed to get hard bids, and many times jobs are done on a cost plus basis. So, you know, they just don't know what the hard number is going to be right when the permit is pulled, or even during the, you know, during the design and permit application process. So that's one thing. The other thing is, all these, I think my feelings, like kind of what our chief building official mentioned, was that 90% of the people here try to do a good job and they make their best efforts, and there's a 10% that cheat. And so one of my concerns is we don't want to make this process cumbersome and more expensive, more red tape, and penalize the 90% that do it right. But also, I think it's good if we, you know, we have the building department that are there to check those 10% and make sure they're complying. So I think we need to have a little bit of trust in the system and not have it be too complicated, because that increases costs for everybody. And, you know, we want to be efficient.
I appreciate that, but I do question the 10% figure, because we were told during the last meeting probably 50% of the applications are bogus. So that's a big difference in 10%. So I'm not sure, because I'm not involved there, but I think that Andrew's staff would know better than we can say right now. But we were told that earlier. And I just wish this could be fair, is all I really care for. And I would like to, I would suggest we postpone this and have Mr. Stuffer come back with the San Diego form that doesn't have the huge discount for remodeling, and see if we can accept something like that. Because I still think, let me just finish this. I still think an owner is not going to go and say, oh, I'm going to pull plans and get contracts, and they're going to cost me a lot more than I thought, so I'm going to drop out of it after putting all that time into it. I don't see that happening. I think a true owner knows pretty much what it's going to cost to do his new project before he's got contracts. He doesn't have the exact number, but you're not going to go in there and put your money up and your time and find out that the contract is 4 times as much as you thought it was going to be, and lose money. So in my mind, an owner knows what these things are going to cost roughly. That's all I'm going to say.
That's what they're, yeah, that's what they're asked to put on the form.
So my perspective, my feeling on this subject is, as much as I would like to see more accurate cost projections and which leads to better ADA expenditure, I think we have a lot of support that for the notion that the process is already too onerous for the developer, for the applicant. I've been there myself. All the hoops that we have to jump through that get tighter and eventually flaming to get a permit, I don't want to add to that for anybody. So I'm in favor of looking at the San Diego document, if that's, you know, something that we can use in our formula to get a more accurate valuation without making it more onerous for applicants or staff, for that matter. I get it, staff spread thin. So I'd be inclined to entertain further discussion. There's no pressure to end this discussion. If Jim or anyone else finds something that we think is worth a look, let's keep looking.
I want to point out, am I still on? I can't see.
We can hear you.
Yes,
Jim.
you're still on.
Okay. All right. Since the little door is closed, the little restaurant across from the courthouse, I want to remind you that I remember that was like $150,000 they claimed they're spending. And yet when there's a slowdown, the owner came and said in City Hall, the City Council, I spent over $1 million on this. There's quite a few different times where we've heard the owners complain about how much they spent. And then you look at the permits and they didn't even get close to what they are. So I hope I'm getting across, but if the owner said that he spent $1 million and the permit says we're going to spend 150,000, there's a big problem here. But I would suggest maybe we just have Mr. Stuffer look at the San Diego and see if we can come to some kind of conclusion on that.
And Mr. Chair and board members, I am more than happy to do that. And any other city or county fee schedules or approaches to this, I will take a look at them and bring them back to the board.
Can I suggest, I have no familiarity with any of these fee schedules, but I think that the city of Oakland is pretty progressive in its accessibility. So that might be something to look at. They might have something useful there. San Francisco as well is also pretty progressive, but I think you mentioned you already did look at San Francisco. So yeah, I think we beat this dead horse today, and I'd like to entertain a motion if anyone else is so inclined. No objections. So I find we have insignificant or insufficient information to make any sort of recommendation at this time. So I move to ask staff to look at.
So excuse me, Nick. Nick, what we can do is we can either make a motion or we can make findings for changing the process and recommend a different process. So I think what we're going to do is we're not going to make a motion to endorse it, but we're going to make findings. So I think you can go ahead and make those findings. I think one of them is to do the San Diego cost estimate process to review that.
Mr. Chair, just a point of order kind of. So this is just, I'm asking the board for feedback, right? There's no decision that's being overturned. It's not an appeal.
No findings.
Yeah, so we don't really need findings. We just need a motion, and a motion that the board, can have a majority vote on that they approve. And it needs no finding or anything. It should be pretty simple.
Okay. So I want to point out that this does have accessibility implications. So if somebody wants to recuse themselves from the vote, that would be appropriate at this time. But the motion that I would like to make is that staff look at San Diego and Oakland's fee schedules, and also examine the discount rate that we're looking at for remodeling versus new construction, and what other communities are doing in that regard, and bring this back to this board at the next convenient time.
Nick, I like that, but could we add in that I think it'd be good if we could contact the CASI group and ask them what their best practices are for figuring out construction costs. This has got to be a big problem for every little town and municipality in the state. And I think CASI might be a good place to go and say, what is the best practices for figuring out the true construction cost?
So I'm gonna chime in here. As a board member for CASI, we do not have such a document.
But could you ask for input from them, from members?
I could send something out, but I think it's a conundrum for all building departments. I think it's been an issue that our staff has struggled with to try to find what is something that's consistent that we can apply, and people that take advantage of these numbers. And it's not just specific to Santa Barbara, it's lots of jurisdictions have problems with this same thing. And we can spend hundreds of hours and still not come up with something that would, have everyone be honest about it.
Board Member Marston, how about if we ask Cassie if their board has any recommendations to make to us, and then it's up to them, and they can decide whether they want to make a recommendation or not. But we can get their input, right? We can ask them, give them an opportunity. Would that satisfy what you're looking for? And your mic may be off. I can't see you, so.
Yes, that would be fine.
Okay. And then I had a clarifying question for Board Member Kuntz. I think I got us started on this term of fee schedule, and I apologize. You mentioned fee schedule a couple times, but I think you mean construction valuation schedule, right?
Correct. And I do believe that you may have caused me to use that terminology, but yeah, construction valuation is what we're after.
Okay, sorry about that.
Okay, so as I understand it, Chief Building Official, there's no need to call to a vote.
Yeah, we would want to call to a vote so that the board's giving their direction. What we don't need findings. We're not overturning any decisions. The board's going to give us some form of majority or unanimous direction.
With the findings are to support why we're making a motion, as I understand it, and in this case, we don't need a reason to make this motion. Is that correct?
Correct. We're not, I don't see this going to court. It's not like someone's going to take this further on their due process rights to, like they would an appeal, right? They may go to Superior Court and say, we want to have this heard before a judge. We don't agree with what the decision of the board of the city. In this case, you're just giving me advice. I'm going to go fetch the advice and the information that you want and bring it back to you so that we can talk about it some more. So we just need a vote, and Nick made a good point. We should ask for one of the members of the board that is not physically disabled to step down for the vote.
This is John. I'll step down.
Okay, so we'll make a motion, and the motion would be to have the building official continue with their validating adjusted construction costs defined in the state building code.
Sorry, Chair Spieler, I think we already have the motion. We just need a second and a vote.
Okay, I was restating the motion. Was that?
Sorry.
We could ask Maria or Greta if they happen to catch the motion that Nick made, and then if they did, they can read it back to us.
I do not
Maria,
have
did
it
you?
recorded.
Okay, thank you.
This is Greta.
Greta, I couldn't hear you. You guys were both talking.
Sorry, I do not have it recorded.
Okay.
All right, maybe since there was a little bit of confusion in the terminology I used in the first place, maybe I should start again with my motion, which is to ask staff to look at the construction cost valuation formulas in San Diego and Oakland, and also any with particular regard or insight into discounts that are applied via remodeling efforts and or That's sufficient.
And I think Andrew said that he would also check with Cassie. Was that correct?
That could be a friendly amendment.
I'm happy to amend that if we agree that there's something to be gained from Cassie. I wasn't sure that we did agree on that, but I'm open to it.
Okay, I'll second that motion then.
All right, so let's call it to a vote. We will use roll call for the vote. Please use your cameras. All in favor, say aye. All opposed, say nay. Jeff Hornbuckle,
Aye.
Nick Kuntz,
Aye.
James Langhorn,
Aye.
Jim Marston,
Aye.
Paul Spieler, aye. Okay, motion carries. We now call for adjournment to the meeting. We need a motion from the board. Yes?
Nick Kuntz, I move to adjourn.
Okay, Nick, okay, who do we have as the second?
John Maloney, I'll second it.
Okay, call to vote. Jeff Hornbuckle,
Aye.
Nick Kuntz,
Aye.
James Langhorn,
Aye.
John Maloney,
Aye.
Jim Marston,
Aye.
Paul Spieler, aye. Meeting's adjourned. You
Thank
guys
you,
have a
everyone.
great day.